Hello everyone. Over the last few decades, the Islamic financial services industry has experienced massive growth, evolving from a niche market into a mature, digitalized global force. However, as the industry structures itself for the future, it faces a highly complex yet rarely discussed operational challenge, which is the quantification of demand for Sharia compliant products. In conventional banking, measuring and forecasting market demand is straightforward. Risk managers rely heavily on standardized empirical metrics, price elasticity models, and predictable consumer reaction to interest rate change. But in the Islamic financial system, we operate under strict legal and ethical parameters, specifically the absolute prohibition of riba, usury, maisir, gambling, and gharar, uncertainty. When you mix this religious sentiment with a severe lack of standardized industry data, accurately calculating and forecasting consumer demand becomes a profound challenge. So now, let's look closer at the three major issues this creates. So, the first issue lies in fragmented consumer psychology. Islamic financial institutions have to model demand for two completely different type of customers. So the first one is the Sharia-driven consumer, whose financial utility strictly prioritize religious compliance, making their demand highly inelastic to cost but deeply sensitive to reputational risk. So the second one is the commercial or rational consumer, who chooses Islamic banking purely for competitive returns and economic convenience. Because rational consumers view Islamic profit rates as a proxy for conventional interest rates, their demand is highly elastic. Without a standardized analytical framework to weigh this psychological duality, demand projection remain highly volatile. The second major challenge is a structural mismatch on the balance sheet. In conventional banking, short-term liquidity shortfalls are easily managed because central banks act as a lender of last resort. Islamic banks do not have this luxury, as interbank borrowing is strictly forbidden. Compounding this, and Islamic banks' liabilities are dominated by highly liquid short-term deposits like wadi'ah and mudarabah accounts. Yet, market demand forced them to deploy these funds into highly illiquid long-term financing contracts like musyarakah or istisna. This creates severe structural pressure when calculating short-term cash demands. So the third one is under Global Basel III regulations. Bank must hold high quality liquid asset to survive a 30 days liquidity crisis. This triggers the mudarabah problem. Technically, mudarabah is a profit and loss sharing account where depositors bear the risk. However, central banks often force Islamic banks to guarantee this deposit to prevent public panic. This regulatory gray area makes it mathematically impossible for risk managers to predict exact outflow demands during a downturn. To compensate, banks aggressively hoard cash or buy up scarce sukuk, leading to capital inefficiency and lower returns for depositors. To overcome this and secure its place in the global market, the Islamic financial system needs targeted strategic intervention, which is the first one is specialized predictive analytics. We must invest in machine learning models that incorporate psychometric data to explicitly map the behavioral shift between Sharia-driven and rational consumers. The second one is regulatory clarity. In collaboration with the Islamic Financial Services Board, regulators must establish definitive, mathematically precise loss-absorbing rules for investment accounts during crisis. In conclusion, the quantification of demand is not just a localized mathematical glitch, it is a structural challenge that slows down the economic velocity of the entire industry. We cannot fix this by simply copy-pasting conventional economic models. True progress requires us to build distinct analytical framework built entirely on the principle of risk sharing and asset-backed finance.